Hello, my name is Rinon and today's video is aiming to clear up any misconceptions or misunderstandings about one of the core elements of FF14 that I feel isn't really explained properly in game itself. This is my first episode of how FF14 works, and today we're going to be discussing damage over time. So damage over time skills and spells actually have a lot of specific nuance in their usage, and if you're coming from another MMO, you probably are not going to be familiar with how they work in game, and these nuances can massively affect how you're able to use your dots efficiently if you are not in the know. If these kinds of videos are at all interesting to you, or you'd like to see more in-depth healer tricks, tips and guide videos, it would be so amazing for me if you'd subscribe to my channel. I post videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and every sub means the absolute world to me. So let's get into it. The first thing to bear in mind, by the way, is that all applied damage over time skills and spells in Final Fantasy XIV work the same. So these general rules are going to apply just as equally for a Bard's Caustic Bite and Storm Bite as they will for a White Mage's Deer. DOT, as it's commonly referred to, stands for damage over time. And like it says on the tin, and I'd imagine you'd expect, that means that instead of it dealing all of its damage up front in a single big hit, it instead does smaller, sustained ticks of damage over an extended duration. You've probably heard the term dot tick before, and a dot tick refers to an individual instance of that damage over time spell applying damage to your foe, or the damage quote unquote ticking over on them. As a little side note, many dots, and I'm going to refer to it a lot as dot from now on, they also apply a certain amount of damage on hit in addition to these ticks. So as a good example of both, you're going to see here that I'm jumping on the training dummy as a bard. You will see me apply both Caustic Bite and Storm Bite, and you will see two damage values pop up. One is going to pop up next to the skill name itself, which is going to signify the damage from the initial hit, and the second one that shows up is going to be the first instance of the dot damage ticking. That is the damage over time damage ticking. The damage on hit will only apply once, but the dot damage is the one that is going to keep reoccurring for the duration of the ability. So when do these dots actually tick and deal damage? Well, overtime skills in Final Fantasy XIV work entirely around the game's server ticks. Every 3 seconds the server is going to tick, and it's going to update the statuses and damage dealt by things like dots to the enemy, and for reference this also applies to healing overtime spells as well. Even if you apply, say in this same example, your Caustic Bite and then your Storm Bite one after another at different times, after the damage from their initial applications they will both tick at the same time, perfectly in sync every 3 seconds. It doesn't matter that one of them went up a second before the other one, the game is going to calculate them both and apply them both at the same time. This is actually very important when it comes to dealing damage in the game, because it can often be very difficult without utilising external tools to figure out exactly when this dot tick occurs, which can lead to some interesting dilemmas. If, say for example, your dots have 1 second in duration left, and you don't really know in the heat of combat whether the dot is going to tick at 1 or whether it's going to tick the split second after your skill falls off, for example. This would result in you losing a tick of damage from them. This is why you are generally going to hear that one of the main rules of FF14 damage dealing being always keep your dot up on the boss. This is why, because if you were to reapply your dot when there is 1 second left on the duration, there is a chance that you might maybe miss out on that one instance of damage if the server tick lines up badly for you. But if you allow that dot to drop for a second or two, then that risk is further and further exacerbated, and then if you let it drop for an extra second or two on top of that, it's made a certainty. Basically, keeping your dots up allows you to mitigate that risk as much as possible. The rule that I have generally used since Shadowbringers released for healer dots, which is going to apply for most instant cast GCD dots in the game as well, is that when my cast ends, I check the dot and I watch for a couple of things. Firstly, you want to check how many seconds are going to be remaining on your dot. If the spell has either 1 or 2 seconds remaining, I will reapply it immediately. If the spell has 3 seconds remaining, I will cast one final Broil, Glare, or GCD of choice, and then I will reapply it after that. If it has more than 3 seconds remaining, I go back to my standard gameplay and I check again the next GCD or two. This is often referred to as clipping your dot, and unlike clipping your GCD, clipping your dot is generally a very good thing and is going to gain you consistency in your damage once you are practiced and comfortable at it. Over time, as you play a job more and more, you can often reduce the need to regularly check on the duration of your dot spell because you innately know roughly how much time is going to be remaining based on the mechanics and your own cooldowns, and this makes life so much easier. This is such a good method to make sure that your dots are up all the time, but that you're making just as much gain as possible from every single tick of each and every dot before you reapply it. I can't even count the number of times that I've hopped into a duty and I've seen players either not apply their dot in the first place, or I've seen them put the dot up and then completely forget about it, allow it to drop off for 5, 10, 15, even more seconds, and that quickly results in their damage plummeting through the floor. I think it can definitely be difficult for newer players to keep on top of, and it's definitely a thing that can be tough to keep your eye on at all times. But I would advise you to make a big effort to bear it in mind until you're more comfortable with it. In most cases, good uptime of your dot directly equals good damage, and it's one of the first things that I'll look at when I'm giving a player advice on how to improve their gameplay, because having good and efficient dot uptime is often a good sign that you have good awareness and that you're more experienced in the game. And I think that being able to keep your dot up at the right time and being able to keep it up effectively is one of the first skills that players learn when they learn to optimize their rotation. There are going to be exceptions to this though, absolutely, so let's talk about those real quick. Encounters in Final Fantasy XIV are incredibly scripted, right? Once you feel confident in the encounter, you often know exactly which mechanic is going to happen, in which order, at what time, and on top of that, you know when the boss is going to leave the arena for a phase change. Dots in almost every situation do not deal any damage when the boss has left the arena or is in any type of form untargetable. This was a change that took place very early in the game's life cycle, and it's something that you absolutely need to pay a lot of attention to. So let's say, for example, I'm on Scholar and I put up my Biolysis and then the boss leaves 5 seconds later and stays away for a minute because there's an ad phase. You just got 5 seconds of value from that Biolysis, which is barely 2 ticks if you're lucky. In a case like that, it would have been better just to allow Biolysis to drop off and use it as an extra Broil 3 cast. It's actually pretty easy to calculate yourself how long a dot needs to tick on a boss in order to be quote unquote worth it. All you've got to do is jump onto your actions and traits hotbar, you highlight your dot skill, and you're going to see the potency and the duration. Keeping Biolysis as the example, you can see it's a 60 potency skill that lasts for 30 seconds. That's going to be 60 potency for each and every tick. So from there, we just multiply. 60 times 5 is going to be 300, and Broil is 280 potency. That means 5 ticks of the dot is going to be more than Broil, but 4 ticks of the dot is going to be less than Broil. So we need 5 ticks of the dot to be a gain. It takes 15 seconds to get 5 ticks because we know that the server ticks every 3 seconds. So from then on, we know that on Scholar, you need the dot to last for 15 seconds to be a DPS gain over using Broil. Whichever class is your main, you can take a quick look and multiply it yourself, or ask in community resources such as the balance to see how long your dots need to tick in order to be DPS positive. I know that was a lot of numbers all at once, but honestly it's very simple. You just have to multiply how much damage the tick does and just keep multiplying until the dot damage multiplied by however many times is greater than the damage skill that you would use instead. There is one last very important thing that we need to talk about, which is a little bit more complex, and that is snapshotting. This is a feature which is going to allow you to optimize your dot damage even further once you understand how to use it to your advantage. But I would by no means recommend caring too much about it for those people who are just looking to understand the core of their class. This is instead going to be reserved for those of you that already understand that and you're looking to push further and harder. Essentially, any buff or debuff that is active when your dot is applied to the enemy will provide that buff to the dot for its entire duration, even if that buff or debuff falls off. 2 really good examples of this are Trick Attack and Chain Stratagem. So Trick Attack provides you a 5% damage up, which is going to be applied for every single tick of your dot if you apply it under Trick, and Chain applies a 10% critical hit debuff, which also applies every single tick of your dot. So as long as you apply that dot while those two buffs are active, you're going to get those two buffs for the entirety of your dot, even if you hit both of them in the final second of those buffs being active. As a side note, yes, individual dot ticks can and will crit, so crit buffs are absolutely relevant to them. Even the main stat buffs provided by potions and tinctures work like this in conjunction with overtime spells and skills. So if you're able to keep an eagle eye on the buffs that your party is putting up, sometimes it can actually be a positive to clip your dot early or apply them late in order to maximize the buffs they're under. Say for example, Trick Attack, Chain, and Battle Litany all have 2 seconds left before they drop, and your dot has 5 seconds left. It's almost certainly going to be a gain to reapply that dot a GCD early, aka immediately, rather than waiting, because the crit value, plus 5% damage you gain, all of that kind of stuff, in the same train of thought, if your dot is at 1 second remaining, and you know that all raid buffs are going to become active in 2 to 3 seconds of time, it's worth just allowing your dot to drop for that GCD, and then reapply it as soon as all the buffs go up. This is something that you're going to have to cater and edit and adjust constantly based on the composition, whatever strat your group or pug is doing and things like that, but this can help you push out even more damage on your classes. I hope this video helped at least a little bit. If you found it interesting or you learned something new, please leave a like, and I would be so thankful if you subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to turn this channel into a little bit of an FF14 resource hub, and I feel this can be pretty useful for players, so let me know what you thought of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day.